And we're rolling. It's been a while. We haven't
Yeah.
posted a video on Church of Logic for a little while. Although I think it would be a good time to start talking about free speech because we're in times of radical change when it comes to our politics,
There's a lot of
culture.
debate around that.
There is, yeah. I mean, so the whole coronavirus thing, I think people are still not quite out of the fuzz that this whole thing has created. So they're not really level-headed to start thinking about the future yet. So everybody's kind of acting for today, out of fear of today, and not thinking about too much of what's going to happen tomorrow. Meaning,
Right.
our democracy's at stake. Edward Snowden. No, I keep saying Edward Snowden. Um, what's his first name? Snowden.
Is it not Edward? I'm pretty
Edward
sure it's
Snowden?
Edward. Yeah, I think you had it right.
Is it Edward Snowden? Yeah, I guess I am right. Edward Snowden came out and talked on Vice about what this could do, technologically speaking, when governments use technologies to their advantage, like South Korea did. So I kind of wanted to ask you a few questions about what you think this could mean as well.
Right.
Because the interesting link here to be kind of clarified is that we have a link between health and politics. This is a very clear line, a very concrete bridge between the two. And so you seem to have a lot to say about the politics that surround, say, diets and meats and health and that sort of thing. So I want to know a little bit more about what you think when it comes to freedom.
Well, I mean, I'm guessing the way that you're talking about politics in reference to health and all that isn't really in the same way that most people would usually talk about politics. You know, it's how do we decide these kinds of things? Like, it's funny, like in the abortion debate, right? You know,
Mm-hmm.
pro-life versus pro-choice. Well, a lot of it is uh, my body, my choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to the pro-choice people, right? And that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, right? You should be able to have the final decision when it comes to what is put into your body, how your body is used. But at the same time, nowadays, there's a lot of talk about what we should be doing to protect each other, right? My body, my choice, or is it really? Do we have to stay inside to protect one another? Well, that's who gets to make that decision, right? Who gets to make the decision regarding what you have to do, what you have to take, what you have to, how you have to think about these kinds of things, right? Do we have a choice in the matter? And if not, who gets to make those decisions, right? Those are big questions. And I'm not saying that it's one way or the other. I'm just saying that these are things that we have to think about on a regular basis and be responsible for as individuals, right? Otherwise, we're giving it away to someone else who is an individual as well. And well, how do we assess who has the authority to make decisions for other people in that sense?
Mm-hmm.
Is that clear?
It is, but it leads me to asking, when you say that it's a responsibility of the individual to think about these things on a constant basis, what if you come upon the conclusion that there's something that has to be done about it, about,
Mm-hmm.
let's say, some law that gets put into effect or something? At that point, if action is something that you've concluded is something you must take, one, what kind of action do you think you should take? And two, how do you segue into this no longer being a project of the individual, but you're turning it into something more societal, right? Because, you know, it's one thing to think about these things, but what if there's a conclusion that you're taking? And then it becomes a political thing. You have to go out. Do you talk to other people, or do you protest or do you organize somehow?
Right.
Like, what's your
Well,
opinion on that?
ultimately, we should have better infrastructure in our societies and our communities to speak up and kind of put pressure on politicians, because politicians don't really do that much. Ultimately, they are usually, they kind of go with the flow ultimately,
Hmm.
and they're sort of the middlemen between a lot of institutions, including the corporate, the academic, the military, and the people, right?
Hmm.
People day to day. And more and more people have been kind of, it's hard to say if there's a conscious influence towards this, or if what semi-conscious or semi, just like how our modern lives have played out in a way. But we're able, at least we have the ability more and more to delegate responsibility, um, to companies, to services, to institutions. So we can do less and less, and kind of outsource more and more to other people. Like we don't like, one of the main services, or like how do I say, utilities, I guess, is food, right? It's
Hmm.
like one of the most important parts of the infrastructure. Or but most of us are not involved in food production, agriculture, food service, food delivery, food preparation, or anything like that, right?
Hmm.
Well, that means that we don't have power over those things unless we pressure those who do take care of those things to do certain things, right?
Yeah.
But we've I don't know why exactly. I could come up with a lot of reasons why it might be, but we've gotten honestly lazier and lazier, and more trusting in all of these groups. And look, honestly, in my opinion, most institutions are fairly trustworthy. But if we let them get away with more and more, then they'll have more and more incentive to get away with more and more, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty
Pareto.
logical.
Yeah. That ties into the Pareto principle pretty much, right?
Yeah, yeah, in large part. So ultimately, I think that the there has to be there can't be just one means of creating community. Usually it's built around food, like if we're looking at our past, but like food, events, like it could be religious. But nowadays we've liberalized and diversified that so much that it's become homogenized, in the sense that there's no real like uh, denominator, right, in any one community, except for the simple fact that we all live near each other, right?
Hmm.
So we don't have as many means of organizing and talking about daily issues, like how many people have a town hall anymore, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can't organize a mob rally. You can't organize, like, you can maybe have petitions online, stuff like that, like on change.org, which is fine. It's a start. It's a great start. But um, how do you start putting pressure on the politicians so that they will, kind of step up, have an incentive to step up, and stop institutions and corporations from just kind of doing whatever they want, right?
Yeah. So I'm gonna try to press you a little bit here, but
Yeah,
wouldn't
yeah, for sure.
wouldn't you consider social media to be those avenues, the way in which we can come together and communicate so as to?
Yeah, but how many people use that in that way, in that sense?
Yeah, I mean,
Because
not expressly that we don't use, but you still see a lot of political things on, for example, on YouTube, on not on YouTube, but on Facebook. You get like on your timeline, people often see people posting political things, especially in times of emergency, like such as this Corona pandemic. So I think
well,
the
first of all,
yep.
I'll just say those social media outlets are institutions in themselves. Like just today, there's a doctor, like fully accredited doctor, who is talking about the issues of immunity, herd immunity, and everything. And it didn't tickle Twitter's fancy so much, so they flagged him today.
Mm.
And he's he's a doctor, and
Mm.
he's talking about these issues in a way that is maybe a little bit challenging to some people.
Mm.
And Twitter took it down. That's a huge fucking issue if that is our avenue of organizing ourselves.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. So I just want to kind of do a little bit of mapping out of where we've gone so far. So the question was, do we have the statement that you had made was that we need to think about this as individuals, and then from there, I was wondering what happens after you've come to the conclusion that an action must be taken. Well, then you said that there's a sort of communication that has to start, obviously, and that's the problem right there, is that we don't have any solid means of communication in a non-biased, completely open way, and a good flow of information that doesn't sort of confuse people rather than bring them together. So um, there's two ways we could go.
Community communication, sorry, I just want to make one thing clear, is very difficult. Like, imagine having a town hall nowadays, how polarized people are online. Imagine having a town hall.
Mm-hmm.
That is challenging as fuck.
Yeah, exactly. But so that's the
That
thing.
is difficult.
Essentially, we have the means of communication. It's not that it's difficult. I think it was before, because before the internet, you only had TV, and it's not like everybody has a voice on the cable channel. You know what I mean? So it really was one-to-one. A lot of discussions that you're having with people, and like the sentiment was a lot more congealed in pockets, if you will, right? Because if you were in a certain city or a certain area of your country, a mentality kind of prevailed, and that formed the basis for some sentiment within that community, because all you had was talking to each other. So I think generally less access to information and less access to put out your own, it made things a lot more, let's say, congealed. Now we have the free flow of information, which is pretty much, I don't think you're making the argument that we don't have the means of communication.
No.
You're saying that we don't have the means to properly communicate. So it brings me to ask, well, how do you think we can fix this? Like, what is it? Is it a retooling of a platform, or is it a new platform altogether, or is it just people reverting to this one-on-one? Where do you see this going to have proper communication to move forward?
That's a great question. Well, I think there is more awareness nowadays about locality, which is huge, which is really the center of a lot of it. Just I'm in Quebec, you're in New Brunswick. Not long ago, our representative Legault, he was actually talking about how we need to be able to think about making Quebec more self-sustainable again, right? And before there was a lot of the separatist movement, the people talking about Quebec separating from Canada, and they had they're a little extreme in a lot of ways, and I don't feel like that movement was grounded in the right things, even though it was an interesting look in the right direction. It's not about separating from Canada, it's about creating independence, right? And it's one thing for countries and people to want to help each other out ultimately, and I think that's very, very important. But how do we help each other out if we don't each have a strong foundation in the first place, right? But yeah, where is this going? That was your question. I do think there's more awareness little by little, that kind of self-sustainability, but there isn't enough being talked about how that would be done. First of all, we need food centralized. I mean, not centralized, but brought back to locality. It's actually the centralization of our food supply that's a big issue because it's globalized, right? So if half of your food supply is shipped in from the other side of the world, from a different country, say you're up north and you can't grow fruit and everyone there loves fucking avocados, then, well, they have to have a large amount of avocados shipped in from Mexico, California, or whatever. But now all of a sudden there's a virus breakout. People are kind of reconsidering a lot of that. And they're realizing, wait a second, this globalist form of economy, which I'm not totally against globalism. It's, you know, it has its upsides and its downsides. That's, I don't want to be black and white here, but we do have to think about both sides. We can't rely on it, right? There's a lot of issues with relying on that kind of thing. So I don't know where it's going to go. I hate predicting things. That's not something I'm
No,
good at.
I
But
don't necessarily.
where should it go?
Well, I'm just saying how can we? I'm not looking for a prediction. I'm trying to understand what are the possible avenues down which we could go in order to, one, fix the problem with communication, and then two, like you said, reorganize our society so that we're able to handle not only our politicians and the access to proper information when it comes to these emergency events, but also to something that's conducive to being independent and not losing our freedoms. Because it seems like these epidemics and other kinds of events are like a major door being opened to sort of like the tyrannical devil on the political shoulder,
Possibly.
to just sort of say, come on in, have this control. We just don't experience so many major emergencies on a global level enough to actually understand how we're supposed to mitigate the effects of that it has on our freedoms and on how we operate society, because we don't have the experience. So going forward, we need to start to at least project the different possibilities that, one, for a better system, because we understand, like you said, if things are too globalized and you don't have enough localization, then you're kind of fucked when it comes to needing, like you said, food and products and so on and so forth. Now I can right off the bat talk about technology, meaning 3D printing is becoming a whole thing, and
Yeah.
we're pretty certain. I mean, it's likely that we will advance our 3D printing technology to the degree where we might even be able to print biological materials, right? Food itself. So at that point, it would be localized almost to the point of, and I know you have some misgivings about that, but I'm just trying to say it's one of the possible avenues down which we could go. And then there's implications to that, like you said, to health. But you can see where I'm going with this, is that there's a certain amount of localization that can happen, and it doesn't necessarily have to impact the political aspect of things. Because I think when people think about local, the environmentalists seem to be okay with it just when you're talking about food and stuff like that, and products, because you're trying to save the environment. But on the other hand, it's kind of ironic because environmentalists usually tend to be on the left side of this political spectrum. And if you were to just say without context, I believe we should, be more local, it does sound like a nationalistic type idea. And it's ironic that they're the ones who are, you know what I mean? But the two don't have to be working hand in hand. I think they can be mutually exclusive. You can have local production or local, economics without there being like a sort of lack of global politics being able to handle these kinds of epidemics.
Well, my issue with the technology thing is, much as it would work to a certain degree, but almost all technologies, the requirements to build them in the first place,
Yeah.
even though they might allow for more sustainability afterwards, they still require materials from all over the place. I mean, that's not ultimately a huge issue, but you can't rely on that. That can't be the number one thing. It has to be number one thing. What can I survive on here, right now? Like, honestly, I think we need more of a movement back to rural parts of the world, people outside of cities. I mean, cities, we know people are sicker, they're more miserable. Now, in a lot of not all cases, but people get paid less in the city. It's much more expensive in terms of rent. It does cost more to get around in the country, but you get what I'm saying. There's also more community in general
Yeah,
in the
there seems to
country
be
because
a shift when it comes to wealth. I mean, before this sort of information age, I'm going to dub it that for now, you had greater wealth opportunity and prospects by moving into the city,
yeah,
whereas now we're seeing a sort of double negative event happening, whereas you don't have any opportunities in the country, therefore you move to the city, and then your opportunities are extremely limited and you're actually making less money, there's less wealth, because if you've abandoned any kind of wealth from the country, usually it's a piece of land or something like that, you're kind of
mm-hmm.
fucked, right? So there's no return on your investment in the sense that you were supposed to go somewhere that allowed you to prosper, which is usually the cities. So yeah, I understand that's a big part of it. And I think economic freedom is basically what we're talking about here, right? Like we have to take into consideration
Much more, yeah.
that the economics it directly translates into the freedom aspect. So I'm trying to get my bearings straight here between
Mm-hmm.
the politics, the infrastructure, the economics,
It's all tied together.
yeah, and freedom. Like how does it all fit in and how do we move forward? Well, again, we looked at communication. Now, if the proper avenues are set up for communication, which I believe they are, but there's perhaps a culture that it
Yes.
has a
Yeah.
runaway effect that exactly we can't really be serious about any of the information that we come into contact with because of this sort of like fake news culture type stuff.
Like,
So
imagine a neighborhood that's divided on a topic. Let's just say, in the States, Hillary versus Trump back in the old election. Imagine a town meeting like
mhm,
that.
yeah, yeah, that
it,
would
it
be,
would be fucked up. It would be really fucked up. And now there's all kinds of other topics
I'm not so sure. Like
thrown in.
it would probably be fucked up, but I mean, online. If you look at online, see in a town meeting,
Exactly.
at least everybody, you're not influenced by the rest of the world. You're just influenced by the people in the room. So there
Yeah.
might be some anger and everything like that. Now it might be more
It
fun,
would go better than online.
but it would go better.
But it's just the first, like the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
because people are actually far more civil in person than online.
Yeah.
Usually, in my opinion, both sides of most debates are filled with people who are a lot smarter than the other side thinks, and usually neither side is actually addressing the arguments of the other side. They're just projecting some bullshit arguments and making fun of that, and then not actually listening to each other. But when you're actually forced to be together and live together and interact day to day, then you start to realize, okay, no, wait, this person isn't that unreasonable.
Mm-hmm.
They might have a different opinion to me, but you can feel it when you're with a person. And even though what they're saying might sound crazy to me on an intellectual level, I know this person. I live with this person. I rely on this person to some degree in my community. It gives you more of a sense of maybe I should consider the arguments from this side. And it allows for more objectivity because everyone's exposed a little bit more to everything on a
Yeah.
day-to-day basis.
Yeah, there's like a personalization there, of course. It's not like online, you're just reading something and it's a political opinion that differs from yours. So you don't have anything emotional to connect yourself. The only emotion that you're getting is the impact of something you disagree with, which is something that you kind of have a reflexive emotion against. It's like, no, I don't want to hear that, or I think that's wrong, rather than having some personalized person behind it and saying, I can see this is something that it impacts your life from that perspective. So I can actually relate a little bit more and not be so steadfast in my ideas. So there's, I think, eventually the effect of understanding that we have the same values. We just have different kind of like perspectives on how we should achieve maintaining those values. Um,
For
so
the
I
most part, there are some crazy fucking people, but
Yeah, but for the most part, if any rational person, I think to some degree that would have that experience more if they talk person to person, which I think it's good that we're doing this. For example, at least I'm seeing you face to face live. However, I want to dive into a little bit more of this whole communication thing, because regardless of freedom politically and whether the government's going to start restricting us, because we're seeing different kinds of memes, and there's one that a buddy of mine sent me recently was pretty interesting. It was just, there's a photo of a quarantine where it's like sick people in hospital beds from like the Spanish flu days, and then on the other side was a photo of the cops restricting movements, stopping cars and everything like that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and on the first photo, it said, something along the lines of, you know, quarantining is the government servicing the society, but like tyranny is when the government just restricts free people. But yeah, so taking care of sick people is called
Yeah.
quarantine, and just restricting free and healthy people is
That's house arrest.
yeah. So basically,
Yeah.
um, this kind of idea, I was trying to give a visual idea of that. That kind of, whether that's going to happen and if it's going to get better or worse in the future, again, I think we can speculate all day long, but if we're really going to stick to the metal here and try to come up with some possible solution, I think we have kind of elaborated that it is something that comes back down to communication. So let's move forward
Mm-hmm.
with the communication thing. I kind of want to get away from the government thing. Let's
All right.
press on. My question would be, sorry, I'm getting these messages here on my question to you is, if communication is the key, and we understand that online is a bit of a problem, then I kind of want to know whether there's this culture that we can perhaps nurture when it comes to discussions with, like you said, our close ones, like family members and so on. Because at this point, I
Mm-hmm.
think it doesn't really help to just have face-to-face conversations with people, like the whole town hall scenario, with other people that differ from you. I think it starts with who you're living with, right? I think um, times of stress really starts to bring out the real values, or at least the real thoughts of each individual. And so you start to see these family members and close friends who are starting to realize, oh my God, we have completely different worldviews, and we've never actually known that until now because the stress is bringing it out. So I think a push towards just talking to who you know and trying to understand them
Mm-hmm.
would be um, the the main solution. However, there's a problem right when you start at that solution, and the problem is that people are so used to not wanting to follow through and listen when they start to hear something that they don't like, especially from their loved ones, someone that's close by, right? It's like this reflexive no. How do you emotionally or spiritually, how do you like nurture people out of that and say, look, you have to have the right, I think, I forget who was this, uh, but Christopher Hitchens had mentioned, it was probably some political philosopher like what's his name, Mill, John Stuart Mill. But anyway, he said, he quoted him, and it was something along the lines of, freedom of speech is also, what encompasses freedom of speech is that you need to have the right to listen and to hear the opinions that you don't like. That's part of the freedom. You need to be free to understand and to see those and to know about the ideas that are around there that you don't like. Like, that's part of your rights. So I don't think people understand that anymore, right? They think, no, they've switched it, and they say, no, I have the right not to be offended or to have to listen to some bullshit that I don't like. Whereas
Yeah.
that is a very crucial and distinctive value in and virtue, I would say, even in our societies today, that has completely gone away and switched. So how do we? I
Mm-hmm.
would say that's my solution. How do we do that though? How do we kind of implement this notion and this culture and this I would say influence into getting people to say, yes, you know what, I want to hear everything, especially if it's something I disagree with.
Well, that's difficult.
So tell.
Um, I'm not sure if there's a specific starting point. That's a good question. But um, the way that you're talking about it, I'm not sure that starting in the household is always necessary. It's a good place to start and feel it out. But if people are resistant to what you're saying,
Mm.
it's it's not necessarily going to work. What you should do ultimately is listen to them.
Mm.
It's, you know,
Mm.
actually really consider what they have to say and,
So first,
you know, question. And like every time you feel like, no, that's bullshit, be like, wait. I need to understand this and I need to understand where this person's root logic is. And if you find that it's just emotional bullshit and they don't want to listen to you, you have to move on for a little while. And hopefully you can, you know, influence, you move on to the next person, your neighbor. Or you look in your town if there's a Facebook group for something that you care about.
mhm.
Shut up. But I'd say the first thing is do it yourself. If you
Yeah,
want other people to listen to you, listen to them.
it makes absolute sense.
Honestly,
So
honestly.
if you're aware that that's the kind of thing you need to do, you lead by example. Very simple. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And it's amazing how much you can like start to connect things to them, because they'll usually have reasoning for what they believe that you can connect to something that you believe in. And it kind of allows you to introduce a little bit of your views to
mhm.
them, and from a place that they can relate to. You know what I mean? It's scary how sensitive some people have become, and that's very difficult. But you gotta pick the lowest hanging fruit, right?
Mhm.
And ultimately, the goal is not to convert people to our beliefs, is it? It's for us to all figure out what's right,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that includes you. That includes you.
yeah, yeah. That's very well said. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, freedom of speech. It's always the starting point. It's just we seem to have. It's kind of crazy because we were carrying that ball, right? The whole social justice warrior. You know, people have the right not to be offended. Otherwise, it's microaggressions, and that's bad. All that sort of culture and cancel culture. We were sort of carrying that fight, and I think people. I don't know if it was getting better. I think there was definitely some pressure kind of alleviating when it comes to guys like Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson might have upset a lot of people on the scene, but I think he did release some pressure there. A lot of comedians have been doing that job.
Mm-hmm.
However, we were still exhausted from that sort of fight of just like, and even those who were ideologically possessed from the other side, from the actual side that believed, hey, look, free speech is only free insofar as you're not offending people. I think even they were pretty exhausted because it would be, right? If you're always policing everybody all the time, that must be exhausting more than someone who's fighting to say, hey, shut the fuck up about the whole I'm offending everybody. Just let me say what I got to
Right.
say. Um, it's exhausting on both sides. So now we're entering this whole pressure zone with this epidemic, so that not only are we tired from discussing with each other and emotionally exhausted, but now we're on top of that, we're having to distance ourselves from each other, and
Mm-hmm.
that's taken the free speech sort of fight to a whole new level, because now who are you around, to have free speech with? It's just go
Yeah.
online, right? And then online is another dumpster fire that it's just people mobbing each other, and so it's just you can see how we've entered this sort of trap, and it's just like it's going to get worse before it gets better. Would you agree?
Yeah. 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 No, for sure. I mean, what are we talking about nowadays, right? There's where's the debate? Okay, there's people who think that 5G is causing coronavirus. They're a minority. I don't think we need to worry too much about those people. But then there's people who talk about 5G. Um, I'm open to that. I know we're not going to go deep into that. I think there's, again, look, I'm deep in the health world. I think that there's something that needs to be talked about on both sides. Okay, then there's the concept of mandatory vaccination, mandatory social distancing. Um, these are things that are hot topics nowadays, and I can feel right now that we're uncomfortable even bringing these things up, right? What
Well,
else?
I
Do you
don't
have
know.
any other examples of things that are like particular issues nowadays? Like, okay,
Yeah,
maybe
the transgender
what kind of
thing.
regulations are going on, right?
Yeah, I think, well, I would have to slow us up a little bit here because I want to, I'm not so sure I agree with the fact that, or not the fact, but the statement you made about a minority not being too dangerous. Because I think this SJW crowd was a minority, but it was so
Right. That's a
powerful,
good point.
and it turned, it just kind of spread, and then it became maybe even
Hmm.
a majority, at least in part, the ideology spread. So, I just want to say it's
The
not,
thing is,
the danger is a little bit
there.
more there than what you had made out to be, but I think you understand that. I think it could be the same thing when it comes to
I
we're
agree,
supposed to do about this freedom thing when it comes to the coronavirus. But
but they were encouraged by the media, the
yeah,
SJWs.
again,
That's different
there's
in a
a whole
sense.
relationship that's self-enabling, right? But like, I was just trying to bring in the notion that minorities can be very powerful and dangerous in the sense that, like, take terrorism for example, right? I forget who came up with this example, but it was brilliant, and it was the whole bull in the china shop scenario. Whereas if you're only a fly and you want to gain some kind of power, well, then you have to upset the system, but you have no power in order to do that. So what is the only thing that you can do in order to upset the system? Well, you can just fly into the ear of the bull, who does have the power. In this scenario, it would be the
Mhm.
government and
Yeah.
society, and just buzz in its ear so that it drives it crazy, and then it just sort of goes into the china shop and just crashes everything. At that point, the chips fall down, and you have a greater chance of obtaining some kind of political power. This is what terrorists do. So, and terrorists are a minority, right? And that's what I'm trying to say is we saw that with ISIS, we saw it with this SJW war
I
that
agree.
still isn't really completely over right now. Communism, socialism in the 20th century was spread like wildfire around the world, killed hundreds of millions. Lots of people like to debate that, but whatever. It's still an ideology that spread to many countries, regardless of if you
You're
believe
right
it's a good or bad
in
thing.
this.
So, yeah,
Just because they're a small group, I don't think that it's not just because they're a small group that I don't think they're a problem. I also just don't think in the situation the 5G people who
yeah,
think
no,
that
no.
that's causing corona are an issue.
Yeah, I know
That's
that
all I
you.
mean.
I do
Yeah.
agree that the 5G people who think causes corona, it's a minority we don't have to worry about. I really do. But I was just wanting to make sure that we don't
You're right.
pass
That's a good
beside.
clarification.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that it wasn't because they're a minority. It's a minority we don't happen to have to worry about.
Yeah.
Just wanted to
Yeah.
clarify that basically. So prior to that, I was just asking whether you thought it's going to get worse